Imagine this. You are the President of the United States. It's late at night. The Oval Office is quiet. No cameras, no advisors, no speeches. In front of you is a map of the world. Not the colorful political map people see on television, but the real one. Shipping routes, missile ranges, satellite orbits, strategic choke points. And something doesn't feel right. China is locking down supply chains faster than expected. Russia is expanding Arctic patrols. The ice at the top of the world is melting faster than anyone predicted. And sitting quietly in the middle of it all is a massive island, frozen, underdeveloped, ignored. Greenland. So a question forms. A question that sounds ridiculous to everyone else. How much? In 2019, when Donald Trump suggested buying Greenland, the world laughed. Media outlets mocked it. Denmark called it absurd. Late-night comedians turned it into a punchline. But here's what most people missed. Trump wasn't joking. And more importantly, he wasn't the first American president to think this way. The United States has been trying to acquire Greenland for more than a century. This wasn't a meme. It wasn't a publicity stunt. And it definitely wasn't random. It was strategy. America's interest in Greenland goes back to the 1860s, right after the U.S. bought Alaska. At the time, buying territory wasn't controversial. It was how empires expanded. Greenland wasn't seen as ice. It was seen as position. A massive landmass sitting between North America, Europe, and Russia, a natural fortress, a control point over the North Atlantic. That's why in 1946, President Harry Truman made a formal offer to Denmark, $100 million in gold. Not dollars, gold. Denmark refused. But here's the part most people don't understand. America never walked away. Instead, it adapted. By 1951, the United States secured permanent military access to Greenland. Radar stations, early warning systems, air bases, quietly. The foundation was laid without headlines. So when Trump revived the idea decades later, insiders didn't laugh. They understood exactly what he was pointing at. Because this story isn't really about buying land. It's about what happens when geography becomes destiny. As ice melts, new shipping routes open. As technology advances, distance becomes reaction time. As global power shifts, old maps stop working. Greenland is no longer frozen space. It's the center of the next great power contest. And while the public laughed, the Pentagon was recalculating missile trajectories. Supply chain planners were studying rare earth deposits. And intelligence agencies were watching the Arctic light up. This video isn't about panic. It isn't about predictions. It's about why the world's most powerful country keeps coming back to the same frozen island, again and again. And to understand why Greenland matters so much, we need to accept one brutal truth. In geopolitics, location beats ideology every time. To understand why Greenland keeps pulling America back, you have to forget headlines and look at a map. Not a political map, a strategic one. Focus on the North Atlantic and you'll notice something strange. There's only one narrow corridor connecting the Arctic Ocean to the open Atlantic. It's called the GIUK Gap. Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom. 3 land masses forming a natural choke point. And in military strategy, choke points decide wars because you don't need to control the entire ocean. You only need to control the gate. During the Cold War, NATO treated the GIUK Gap as a kill zone, not because war was inevitable, but because detection was everything. Soviet submarines carrying nuclear missiles had to pass through this corridor to reach the Atlantic. If they slipped through undetected, America's reaction time collapsed. Minutes mattered. That's why Greenland became indispensable. From northern Greenland, radar systems could track submarine movement, long-range bombers, ballistic missile launches, objects in space. This wasn't about power projection. It was about early warning. Because in nuclear strategy, distance equals survival time. A missile launched from deep inside Russia gives the U.S. more time to respond. A missile launched closer cuts that time in half. Greenland sits right in the middle of that equation. This is why military planners often call Greenland an unsinkable aircraft carrier. You can't torpedo it. You can't move it. You can't sanction it away. It's fixed, massive, perfectly positioned. That's why the U.S. built Thule Air Base, now called Patuxent Space Base. This isn't just a military base. It's one of the most important pillars of America's missile warning system. Ballistic missile detection, satellite tracking, space domain awareness. If something launches anywhere in the northern hemisphere, Greenland sees it first. But here's where the story changes. This isn't just about Russia anymore. China has entered the Arctic, not with warships, with investments, ports, research stations, fiber optic cables, mining partnerships. China openly calls this strategy the Polar Silk Road. Why? Because melting ice is rewriting global trade. New Arctic shipping routes can cut 10 to 15 days off Asia-Europe transit. That's not convenience. That's leverage. Whoever controls the infrastructure around those routes controls the toll booth of future global trade. And Greenland sits right next to those gateways. This is where military logic meets economic reality. You can't separate them anymore. Missile defense needs radar. Radar needs territory. Territory needs political access. And political access depends on influence, which is why Greenland is no longer just a military asset. It's a strategic multiplier. Control the GIUK Gap, and you don't just watch the North Atlantic, you shape who moves through it. And that brings us to the next layer of the conflict. Because Greenland's value doesn't stop above ground. It gets far more dangerous under the ice. For most of history, Greenland was dismissed for one simple reason. It looked empty, too cold, too remote, too expensive to matter, but that assumption was built on ice, and the ice is disappearing. As Arctic temperatures rise, Greenland is revealing something that had been hidden for thousands of years. Not water, resources. Under the melting ice lies one of the largest untapped reserves of rare earth minerals on the planet. These aren't optional materials. Rare earths are the backbone of modern power. They are essential for smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, fighter jets, missile guidance systems, satellites, advanced radar. Without them, modern economies stall. Without them, modern militaries fail. And here's the uncomfortable reality Washington can't ignore. China controls 80 to 90% of global rare earth processing, not mining, processing. That distinction matters, because even when rare earths are mined elsewhere, they are often shipped to China to be refined, which means supply chains run through Beijing. That's not an economic inconvenience. That's a national security vulnerability. In a geopolitical crisis, supply chains don't fail politely. They get weaponized. This is why Greenland suddenly looks different to Washington. The US doesn't just see ice retreating, it sees an escape route, a way to diversify supply, a way to reduce dependence, a way to avoid being cornered. And China sees the same thing. Over the past decade, Chinese companies have quietly pursued mining projects in Greenland, not loudly, not militarily, through joint ventures, infrastructure funding, research partnerships. Because China understands something most people miss, you don't need to conquer territory to control it. You just need to become economically indispensable. This is where the Arctic Cold War becomes real. No tanks, no troops, no dramatic headlines, just contracts. But minerals aren't the only secret buried in Greenland's ice. In 1959, the United States built something extraordinary beneath the surface, Camp Century, an underground city carved directly into the ice sheet. Officially, it was a research station. Unofficially, it was part of a classified military project known as Project Iceworm. The plan was simple and terrifying. Hide hundreds of nuclear missiles inside thousands of miles of ice tunnels. Mobile launch sites, hidden from satellites, protected by ice. Close enough to reduce reaction time. The project failed. Not because of politics. Because the ice moved. Too unstable. Too unpredictable. Camp Century was abandoned in 1967 and left behind radioactive waste, chemical contaminants, infrastructure entombed in ice. Today, as the ice melts, those remnants are resurfacing, creating a paradox. The same climate change that makes Greenland strategically valuable is also exposing the environmental cost of past military ambition. But Washington isn't focused on the past. It's focused on leverage. Because rare earths plus geography equals power. And power, in geopolitics, is about options. Whoever secures Greenland's resources doesn't just gain materials, they gain the ability to act when others can't. And that shifts the balance quietly, before anyone realizes what changed. But there's one variable that makes this battle far more complicated. Greenland isn't just ice and minerals, it's people, and people change everything. Most geopolitical analysis makes the same mistake. It treats Greenland like empty land. Ice, minerals, military positioning. But Greenland isn't just geography, it's people. And people complicate power in ways maps never show. Greenland today is self-governing, but not independent. It controls its internal affairs, but its economy depends heavily on Denmark. Every year, roughly $600 million flows from Copenhagen to Nuuk. That money keeps the system running: healthcare, education, public services, infrastructure. Without it, Greenland doesn't function as a modern state. And yet, many Greenlanders want independence, not because they want to join another empire, but because they want control over their own future. This is where the pressure begins. Independence requires money. Money requires a partner. And partners always come with conditions. Denmark provides stability, but limits strategic autonomy. China offers investment, but creates long-term dependence. The United States offers security, but expects alignment. This isn't diplomacy, it's a competition for influence. And influence doesn't need ownership, it needs leverage. This is why Washington's strategy has changed. The language has shifted. The The US no longer talks about buying Greenland. It talks about securing interests, military cooperation, infrastructure investment, economic partnerships, because whoever replaces Denmark's funding doesn't need to own Greenland. They become indispensable. And indispensable actors don't ask for permission. They shape outcomes. But there's a problem. Greenland's infrastructure is severely underdeveloped. There are no roads connecting major cities. Everything moves by air or sea. Ports are limited. Energy systems are fragile. Modernizing Greenland would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Denmark can't afford that alone. Greenland can't afford it at all, but two countries can, the United States and China. This is why pressure is increasing, quietly. More military investment, more research funding, more strategic signaling. Not headlines, just presence. And once presence becomes normalized, it doesn't reverse. Because this isn't about today's value. It's about tomorrow's position. As Arctic shipping lanes open, as ice retreats, as reaction times shrink, as resource access expands, Greenland moves from peripheral to central. And history is clear about one thing. When frontiers open, competition follows. But here's the uncomfortable reality most analysts avoid. Empires don't fall because they expand. They fall because they overcommit to maintaining dominance in a world that's already changing. Britain learned that lesson too late. Not when the pound collapsed, but when defending it became too expensive. This is the tension Washington is navigating now. Not whether Greenland is worth attention, but whether securing it drains resources needed elsewhere. Because influence is cheap at first and brutally expensive later. Which brings us to the final question. Greenland isn't about conquest. It's about time, and whether buying time is enough to delay decline. Greenland isn't about conquest. It never was. The United States isn't trying to buy land. It's trying to buy time. Time to secure supply chains before they fracture. Time to control geography before it controls them. Time to adapt before the balance shifts permanently. This is the part most people misunderstand. Great powers don't collapse because they lose wars. They collapse because maintaining dominance becomes more expensive than the benefits it delivers. Britain didn't lose its empire overnight. It lost it slowly. Through commitments it could no longer afford. Bases, trade routes, currency defense, political influence. Each one made sense individually. Together they became unsustainable. The United States understands this history better than any other country, which is why Greenland matters. Not because it guarantees dominance, but because it delays vulnerability. Control over Greenland offers earlier missile warning, shorter reaction times, secure Arctic access, diversified resource supply, influence over future trade routes. Each advantage buys margin, and margin is everything in geopolitics. But here's the paradox. The very forces making Greenland valuable are the same forces eroding American dominance elsewhere. Climate change opens Arctic routes, but destabilizes economies. Technological dependence increases efficiency, but exposes supply chains. Globalization spreads influence, but weakens control. Greenland sits at the intersection of all of it, which is why the real Arctic Cold War isn't loud. There are no invasions, no ultimatums, no dramatic headlines, just budgets, agreements, infrastructure, presence. And once presence becomes permanent, it reshapes the future quietly. This is why Denmark insists Greenland is not for sale, and why that statement misses the point. Because ownership isn't required. Influence is enough. Whoever becomes Greenland's primary partner sets the rules of access. Whoever builds the infrastructure controls the choke points. Whoever secures trust reduces resistance. This is how modern power works. Not through flags, through dependencies. But here's the final risk, the one history keeps warning about. Buying time doesn't guarantee survival. It only postpones reckoning. Every empire believes it can manage decline with better strategy, better technology, better positioning. Some succeed longer than others. None escape forever. The question facing the United States isn't whether Greenland is valuable. It clearly is. The question is whether securing Greenland actually solves the deeper problem. Because geography can buy time, resources can buy leverage, but neither can buy legitimacy. And legitimacy is what holds systems together when pressure rises. Greenland reveals something uncomfortable. Power is shifting north, but trust is thinning everywhere. And once trust becomes conditional, every move costs more. Every alliance weakens. Every position requires defense. This is why Greenland isn't the end of the story. It's a signal that the world is entering a phase where power is decided earlier, farther away, and more quietly than most people realize. The ice is melting, not just revealing land, revealing intent, revealing pressure, revealing a future where competition begins long before conflict. The Arctic is no longer the edge of the map. It's the center of the next one. And now that you've seen the pattern, you'll start noticing it everywhere. Subscribe